So today we are into Gandhi and continuing with the theme of what we looked at last time, which is the formation of the middle class in India as a direct consequence of colonial rule, right? Now this, this is continuous with it, but it's obviously a kind of unexpected, sudden and astonishing transformation, right? I think in the first week's readings, in Sunil Khilnani, he gives us an indication of, or in fact in Jawaharlal Nehru's text last time, Nehru talking about Congress and how they were feeling, how the whole country was in a state of great dejection, mood, depressed mood. And then he's, you remember that sentence, short sentence, he says, and then Gandhi came, right? This is that sense of, sudden something new, something that fell from the sky, something like a miracle, something transformative. So it is, so today's, looking into this text and also into the life of Gandhi, what I would like to sort of, for us to think about is the nature of this new element that has been introduced into the field of Indian politics, which was until then has a particular character. Middle class dominated, no relationship with the masses of the people. It's not that they are not talking about the people. They are talking about the people. That is those who came before Gandhi, all those middle class leaders. They are saying this drain of wealth. There is a R.C. Dutt, Economic History of India. It's mentioned in this text also. Drain of wealth theory. One of the proposals that R.C. Dutt makes is how colonial rule is resulting in a drain of wealth. That is, wealth from India is being siphoned off and taken away to England by the British, right? And this is R.C. Dutt. Then there is Dada Bhai Nauroji, the grand old man of India, this is called. He's mentioned in the book also, by Gandhi also. He talks about, he actually is somebody who goes and lives in London and in order to campaign for freedom. And he spends a lot of time there, so he's actually, he even gets into the, the parliament, the upper house of parliament. And he accuses them of un-British rule. That is, he is telling the British that what you are doing in India is an example of un-British rule, and so on, right? And Gokhale, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, he is a moderate, one of Gandhi's, a kind of guru to Gandhi, a spiritual leader to Gandhi, somebody whom inspired him. Gokhale is a moderate who is the other thing is petitioning. That is, all of these people in the Congress are basically petitioning the Indian government, British government, colonial government, to give us more freedom. So, they are not saying, they are not in any way saying that we want to be free of your rule entirely. They are not saying that. They are petitioning to say, govern better, be more just, be more British, because in Britain you are very nice, you are good people, right? So, you should do the same in India that you are doing in Britain, right? This is the plea, this is the kind of the sort of thing that is going on. Now, another thing that comes out here is that the Congress, Indian National Congress, this is what it is called, INC, right, Indian National Congress. So, actually it is not a party, this is not a party, like a political party, Democrats, Republicans, Labour, Conservative, Central Party, Catholic Party, this is not a party. It is a Congress in the sense that in those days all types of people, whether they are conservative or radical, extremist, moderate, all of them would be in the Congress. So, they would be fighting among each other, but they nevertheless were members of the Congress, right. That is why the moderates and the extremists are the two factions of the Congress. So, this National Congress is set up in 1885, and the primary figure who behind the setting up of the Congress is a man called Alan Octavius Hume. An Irishman who came to India, and there are many explanations for it. Some people say that basically this Congress is the British strategy to pacify the Indians, to keep them quiet by starting off a national movement. Gandhi says no, that is not really the case in this text, as we will soon see. And one of the most important leaders of the Congress before Gandhi was Annie Besant. Annie Besant is a member of the Theosophical Society. Now, this Theosophical Society is a kind of it's not religious. It's more, there is a certain kind of spirituality, a spiritual sort of movement that it is, which has a presence outside India also, and it is basically a combination of the Theosophical Society's doctrine and Annie Besant's own sort of understanding of India, her way of invoking the ancient Vedic past and other aspects of ancient Indian history and so on, in order to mobilize people against British rule. This movement under Annie Besant, basically the movement attracts the middle classes again in the cities. So, you have certain developments in those days, right. One is that you have Annie Besant's Theosophical Society, the Theosophists. In Madras, in the south, they are somewhat influential. In Calcutta, you have the Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo Samaj, which we talked about last time, right? The Brahmos, you see, Keshav Chandra Sen, who last time we looked at how Keshav Chandra Sen is a Brahmo, and he is saying somehow the Brahmo Samaj is not attracting too many people. So, he is starting to look at Hindu religious leaders. So, the Brahmo Samaj, the Theosophical Society of Annie Besant, then there is a Prarthana Samaj. This is Prarthana Samaj, means prayer society. This is also a new kind of spiritual movement. And then there is in the northwestern region a very influential movement called the Arya Samaj. this is a reformist movement within Hinduism. It says you should not have so many different caste and other kinds of practices. You Hindus should be united and they should all perform the same rituals, the same kind of religious practices, and it tries to reform. So there is a man called Dan and the Saraswati in behind that, and so on. So this is a kind of background, right, of this. Now in Bombay region, Bombay Pune region, another leader like Besant is an Indian, a very learned man called Bala Gangadhar Tilak. What Tilak does is, Tilak says you must mobilize the masses. Now, as we said, mobilizing the masses was not a great agenda for the Congress, but Tilak is in the Congress and he is starting to mobilize the. But how does he mobilize? He mobilizes by reviving, or on a large scale, a religious festival. So there is a religious festival which is a very minor thing, you do it in your villages, in your homes, small thing. Tilak takes that and makes it a festival in Bombay, in the cities, and he starts campaigning for a kind of collective celebration of this festival. So that means he is mobilizing for political purposes, but using this religious festival of Ganesha. You might have heard this elephant god. Tilak is the one who sort of makes Ganesha, who has always been there, but not as a god for everybody, a kind of village god, some small, in a temple you might be, one Ganesha in a corner. In fact, if you go back into history, Ganesha is somebody who is reviled, that is detested, hated by the mainstream Hindu, the descriptions, because he is considered the god of the Ganas, the ordinary people, the tribes, the communities which are non-Aryan and so on. So there is a very complicated history to that figure, but Tilak decides to revive it, and he makes it even today. It is one of the biggest festivals in Bombay. The entire city sometimes get paralyzed when that day that the idol is taken for immersion in the ocean. They drop the idol after some 12 days or of the festival. So it was a very powerful movement. So there is it's and Tilak is not a moderate, he is an extremist. Tilak is saying get out, they have to, they just have to get out, the British have to get out, and he is using this kind of religious idol for mobilization. So it has all kinds of implications, because India is at this time being defined as India. What does India mean to the British? India is a place where the Hindus live, and where before we came, that is the British, before we came, Muslims ruled. So as far as the British were concerned, Hindu and Muslim, that is the nature of the Indian population. The India as a nation consists of two religious communities, Hindus and Muslims. Now, this is not so obvious, but it became so. For instance, if you go to Madras, Tamil Nadu, Chennai, museum, you will see a marble frieze, like that, etched in marble, which shows the queen in the middle and one Muslim and one Brahmin looking, saluting her. So this is how they envisaged their own rule, that the queen is here, or queen or Britannia, Britannia, the feminine sort of image of Britain, with these two worshipping at her feet, Hindu and Muslim. So, the Hindu, whether India is a country of Hindus and Muslims, that is an interesting question which we will get back to again. But that is the situation. So, Tilak, for instance, Tilak's mobilization is directly and very provocatively Hindu in character. That is what one must remember, right? And that is one of the contexts in which we have to see what Gandhi is doing here, right? As I said last time, I think the text has many things for a modern sensibility, for sensibilities of the today's world. There are many things in here which might appear to be quite shocking or puzzling at the most, or even amusing, right? Sometimes. So, would anybody like to say something about how they experience this? I mean, what they felt about this text. So, well, let's say this Hind Swaraj. We are looking at the text called Hind Swaraj, which in English is called Indian Home Rule. And there is young Gandhi, as you can see, a very westernized young man who went to London, who became a lawyer. He was a very successful student. He did very well and got his law degree. And in 1922, when non-cooperation started, the Inner Temple, in London there is a thing called the Inner Temple which gives law degrees. I mean, which you become a member of that. The Inner Temple suspended his membership because he started the non-cooperation movement in India. And I was just checking it last night, and it said that in 1988, just now, some years ago, they they took him back after he died. So he was suspended. He was thrown out effectively for having begun the. And you can see as you go into this thing. Well, there is on the left the announcement of India's freedom that we can stipulate. So here is Gandhi at another phase of his life. This is when he is writing Hind Swaraj. So he is back to South Africa. He's been, of course, traveling to India also, but he's in South Africa, and he is in South Africa. He is a lawyer for the Indians there. The Indians in South Africa are facing a lot of discrimination. So it's a white kind of government, supremacist kind of government. And the blacks, so there are the blacks, there are the Indians, there are other kinds of people also from other places, but essentially the large groups are the black native population, the Indians who are smaller but very, very influential community because they were businessmen and and also indentured labor. So there were those, and then there were the whites who were again divided between the British origin and Dutch origin. There, Gandhi is the lawyer for all these Indians who need to petition the government again, for various things. And Gandhi has some interesting experiences. One day he decides to get onto the first class compartment of a train, and which is against the rules. You can't, natives, blacks are not allowed, or colored people are not allowed in the first class compartment. So at one station, the white people inside to tell him to get out, and when he starts to ask them why, they throw him out. Bag and baggage dumped there. Right? This is a very momentous kind of significant experience of a kind of humiliation that we were talking about the other day. And often many different kinds of things in which the Indians felt that they were not getting the kind of the kind of dignified treatment that they deserve, right? So, that was there, but it was also a very complicated situation. It was not just a question of oppressed Indians and oppressing white people, because it was also a case of Indians somehow being caught in the middle between the black people of natives of South Africa and the whites, and wanting to be recognized as equals by the British and wanting not to be associated with the blacks. This is also a very strong reasoning there, right. So, they did not want to, so they felt that the British were not recognizing the difference between them and the blacks. So, there was a racist element within that also, and sometimes at least one or two occasions Gandhi is reported to have in fact pleaded very much on those lines. As I mentioned previously, that when they were sent to prison, Gandhi petitions the warden to say, put us in a different cell, not with the Zulus, and so on. So those kinds of experiences are there. Those are early experiences. So I mean, this is obviously a human being who is learning, becoming politicized, but also very much part of the time, the mentalities that were prevalent in those days. He is not free from it, but he moves, right. He, with each experience, with each new challenge, he sort of learns and moves ahead. And there is a particular stage in which this text is written, 1909 and then 1910, right. That is when this text is written. In South Africa, there is a magazine they run called Indian Opinion, which has Gujarati and English. So, this text is published there and also published in India. In India, the government bans it. So, at that time it is only published in Gujarati. The government bans it, and then when they hear about the ban in South Africa, Gandhi then decides, on advice from a number of his friends there, to translate it. So, what you have here is what Gandhi himself, along with somebody, so he says that he actually read the Gujarati and dictated something roughly, not exact, but something which will sound good in English to the person, and it was that is how the translation was done. Okay, now Gandhi spent a number of years in England, a long time, and in that time, I mean, which also he writes about in his autobiography, right. So, one of the things in Gandhi's early life is that his mother says when he is going, they have to perform a ritual for going abroad. Going abroad is a sin in that community. If you go abroad, you lose caste, right. You become in fact, I do not know if it is true, but apparently one of the gurus, spiritual gurus of modern times, Shankaracharya, apparently he went to China for some reason, mainland China, and before going there he wanted a well to be dug for him to get water from special well and so on. So, this various stories like that. So, it was a very orthodox community. So, he makes this vow that he will not touch any woman in the outside of the thing. He will not drink, he will not smoke, and all those things, that he will not eat meat or and so on. And he goes there, and then he writes about the moments when he his temptations got the better of his sort of resolve. And he also is very much influenced by a number of writers of that time. Now, these writers are all of a particular, I mean, there are many differences between them, but they are all of a particular temperament, outlook. I will give you the names. John Ruskin, who wrote the book Unto This Last. Tolstoy, right, Leo Tolstoy, Thoreau and Emerson, the American. Thoreau and Emerson. Now, these are some of the Edward Carpenter. These are some of the people whom he is reading and who influence his thinking. Now, what are these people? What do they represent? They represent a reaction to the worst atrocities of capitalist industrial society. That is, they represent a reaction to a strong protest against the kind of modern sort of life that is emerging as a result of industrialization. Right? So, for instance, you know, Tolstoy has a farm, right? Tolstoy has wants to introduce a new way of life, you know, which involves a different kind of thinking about all aspects of life, right? In America, he goes to Thoreau, right? Goes into the woods, nature. There is a kind of new kind of thinking that he wants to propagate, and so on. Ruskin talks about how the relations between industrial capitalists and labor is one of the worst kinds of relations which never existed. Such a relation never existed at any time, he says, because this is the first time that the employer and the employee relation is based on the fact that the employee, the worker, can never trust the merchant, the businessman, because they think that he is only looking after his interest. So, he contrasts it to other kinds of leaders, that even if in an army, when you go, when a captain, when a general or whoever takes soldiers and says, sacrifice your life for, in this battle, they willingly do it according to this argument. They do it, they go because they know that he is also working with them, that he is not selfishly saying you go, I'll, and so on. There is a code involved. He says merchants, on the other hand, the capitalist of today has no such thing, and therefore he advocates a kind of a series of measures to ensure that the greed of the capitalist is restrained, that it's contained, and so on. So, like that, there are a number of these thinkers. So, Gandhi essentially is a figure influenced by and in some ways taking forward that kind of thinking, which is anti-capitalist, but from a very some of them are anarchist thinking, right? There is an anarchist element. Some are socialistic in their thinking, but everybody wants to somehow restrain the capitalist, the greed of the capitalist, and to provide for security to people and for the possibility of a wholesome life, a life which is not parceled out into working hours and eating hours and so on. So, that is the context. You will see, that those are constantly mentioned here also. So, I have in this, those of you who have got this, you will at the end of it, the first page in this thing has been over thing, but the passage is given in the last, at the end of this file, if you want. So, there is as I said, Gandhi in 1910, and then another sort of picture of a different costume, which is in between, right? And then a much later moment, when Gandhi is in conversation with Nehru at a Congress, at the ashram or at one of the Congress sessions. These. So, not 10, 20, the 20s or 30s even. It could be 30s, I would think. Yeah, the non-cooperation movement is the first big thing that Gandhi organizes. Non-cooperation, which is sometimes called civil disobedience. Now, civil disobedience is not invented by Gandhi. For instance, the suffragettes in England, they are practicing civil disobedience. You know, it's a common notion, right? By then. But Gandhi, using the word non-cooperation, he tries to distinguish it. He's, civil disobedience in a way is a very active and deliberate, provocative breaking of the laws. Whereas in non-cooperation, Gandhi tries to sort of tone it down so that it doesn't have the character of a challenge. But interestingly, what happens is, this is one of the most interesting episodes in Indian history, is from 1919 this civil disobedience starts. There are different stages, and it goes on continuously for 3 years. Okay? In 1922, something quite amazing happens, which is there is a police station. The subaltern studies historian Shahid Amin, he wrote an essay called Gandhi as Mahatma, in which he said Gandhi by then was called Mahatma. Within a few years of his becoming president of the Congress and coming to be known to the larger public, he says that basically people didn't know who this was. They heard about him. And those days, communication was not, there was no, much instant, communication possibilities, no TV, no, even the newspaper, illiterate people, newspapers, if they were there, never really reached the rural areas, or reached. So people didn't really know what, so all they knew was there is a new Mahatma, there is a new great man, and that he wants India to be free and we have to do something to become free. This is it. So for them, whatever you do for getting freedom is Mahatma's orders. So the Mahatma is a name used by them in order to take their own initiatives, to do whatever they consider. So the idea that there is a specific program and that you should do it like this but not like that, you should not indulge in violence, you should not do this, you should not confront a police officer, you should not and so on. None of those things. They are not aware of these things. So in 1922, in a northern Indian state called Uttar Pradesh, which current United Provinces, in a place called Chauri Chaura, there is a kind of demonstration. Police are out there, and then the mob, the crowd is huge. So what they do is they push the police back into the police station, and they set fire to the police station. So the 23 policemen are killed in the fire. Okay. So this is one very big incident of violence. Now remember, one thing I should tell you is, when non-cooperation started in 1919, one of the things that set it off, one of the immediate provocations is the British general, Colonel Dwyer, had ordered a firing on a peaceful demonstrators in a park which had only one entrance, in which people were gathered. They had no arms, they had no nothing. The police entered, they said we have to break this for whatever reason, and they simply fired on these people who had nowhere to go, right? No escape routes.
This is encircled.
Encircled with one entrance, which of course was, yeah. That was one of the starting points of the non-cooperation movement. I mean, there were other things. There was a Khilafat which has to do with international relations, you know, with Turkey, what is going on in Turkey. And there was also the Rowlatt Act, which was introducing very harsh sort of policing measures and so on. Now, Jallianwala Bagh, that is the spark where the thing happened. Now, it's like when Jallianwala Bagh happened, Gandhi actually did not condemn it as roundly as anybody else did. Everybody else was shocked and angered. Gandhi said, it's our own fault or something like that. So, you know, but I think the thing about it is Gandhi is always trying to restrain anger, you know, saying, don't get angry. So he felt that this outrage at Jallianwala Bagh could flare up, could explode into something. So again, you know, he tries to say, no, it's not, and so on. You know, we should have, it's our fault. So here, when this happens, Gandhi immediately calls off the entire non-cooperation movement, which has gone on for 3 years, and it is one of the, you know, most amazingly prolonged, sustained campaigns that you could think of in you know, in history. But he says, no, if we call it off, this is very bad, this is a sin, we've done a Himalayan miscalculation. It's my fault, I should not have believed that our people are not ready for independence. He basically concluded from this. They are immature, they need to be educated, and until then it's not possible. So he calls it off. All the leaders in the Congress are completely shocked by this sudden thing. So the meaning of this thing, you know, what is the nature of Gandhian leadership? That's what is the question that arises from this. So we will keep that in mind. But yeah, so some of the other events in Gandhi's life which are of importance: the Dandi Salt March, 1930, when there is a salt tax. The British are taxing salt, and they are trying to monopolize the salt trade. So in order to break this, Gandhi starts a march, which is a long march towards a place called Dandi, and picks up some salt from the sand beach there, and, you know, in a defiance of the salt law. And that's one of another huge moment of success in Gandhi's political career, which really gives him a lot of a big boost. This text is written, as you can see, as you know, in the form of a dialogue. So there is a reader, that is the reader of the paper that is being run by Gandhi. The reader asks some questions. Of course, Gandhi is writing whatever the reader is saying. The questions are also written by him, and they go over a number of issues. It's a very interesting, you know, and carefully designed sort of presentation, because it begins with the history of the Congress, right? What is the Congress all about? And Gandhi defending the Congress against and the national movement, the partition of Bengal, which is the chapter 2, and what has happened, the unrest in the country, and the question of Swaraj. Swaraj is the word for independence, okay? Right, self rule, that's the Swaraj, Swaraja. Now there is some discussion of the title. If we have time, we'll come to that. It's not terribly important for us now. So Gandhi first tackles the question in chapter 1 of the Congress and the question of independence, right? So page Right. Now this bilingualism of Hind Swaraj, this is a question we might come back to later, okay. But for the time being, we will just concentrate on the text. So, home rule, this is about the title, home rule, Indian home rule, Hind Swaraj. Of course, home rule is already being used. In fact, Annie Besant is leading the home rule movement. And what Gandhi does is he redefines it. And the redefinition is, makes a huge difference to the meaning of it. Okay, we will come to that. So, first of all, one of the first things you find in this is the ancient civilization of India, which he says is the best that the world has seen. So, immediately the tone of the text is set. That is, he is going to say, take this stand that everything in India is far superior to everything in Europe, in Britain, right. This is, you can think of it as a kind of rhetorical position that he adopts in order to sort of be, speak, saying from what position am I going to speak. For instance, it's a choice. The same people, his own, like Ruskin, Tolstoy or Thoreau or Emerson or Edward Carpenter or any of those other people, they don't speak like that. They try to argue. They try to take the other person's point of view and say, okay, this is a problem. It may be true that this is the case, but it's, and so on. They try to write a detailed argument. Gandhi is not doing that in this text. He is adopting this defined stance, saying, okay, everything about India is absolutely the greatest thing that ever happened to the entire world. It's like that's one of the things that can shock in the beginning. So, what is this greatness? That he is going to obviously define it. As we move along. So, what he considers to be happening in the world in India is that the British government represents a struggle between the kingdom of Satan and the kingdom of God. So, first of all, the second move. What is the second move that he is making? He is appropriating the discourse of Christianity for himself. And now he is saying, so British are supposed to be Christians, India is supposed to be a Hindu Muslim country. Now here he is adopting the Christian language of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan, right, straight out of the Bible. So then he will say that England is, so there is first of all this defiant stand that of affirming everything Indian and denouncing everything British. Secondly, appropriating the discourse of Christianity and defining the West or England, Britain in particular, as the kingdom of Satan. But thirdly, why is it the kingdom of Satan? Not because these people are satanic. He is not saying the British people are satanic. He is saying they are afflicted. That is, Satan has got into them. So, thirdly, he treats it as a disease. Modern civilization is a disease. So, if a patient is suffering from a disease, you don't get angry with the patient. You just say that the disease is a bad thing, you should remove it. Right? So, that is how these maneuvers, these kind of rhetorical strategies have this amazing capacity to sort of actually denounce and make the most scandalously anti-British statements without actually seeming to do so, while all the time saying it's not their fault. They are, they have a problem, right? They are afflicted. It's a disease. So that is one of the things, another strategy that he will employ. Now, if you look at it, none of those people who are influencing Gandhi, the Tolstoy, Emerson, Thoreau and so on, none of them actually says, will talk like this about this. But he is, developing this kind of rhetorical strategy. So, as he says there, my countrymen think that the English people are bad, but that is not the case according to him. He says, no, English people are not bad. And in fact, he says the is that my countrymen want to adopt modern civilization from the English. And Hind Swaraj is written to show that they are following a suicidal policy. That is, what is called modern civilization is a disease, and English people are already suffering from it. So, he says, my countrymen, that is other leaders, the extremists, want to drive out the British, but have British rule. That is same type of government, same type of society, etc. So, he is saying this is a problem, this is a suicidal policy, and it is my book Hind Swaraj is written to show that. And he wants India to revert to their own glorious civilization and to. Now, another thing he introduces, another thing which is very common theme in India even today, he says many Indians not touched by what is known as civilization. That is, he makes a distinction between people like himself who have gone and got educated under British, right, in British institutions, who have modernized, who have become somehow part of that English speaking middle class kind of community, and those many people, the masses, the majority who have not come into contact with this world at all. He says they are different from us, right, and the civilization that they represent, they don't want this kind of rule, right. So, chapter 1, the Congress and its officials. So, here the reader keeps challenging the role of the Congress, and Gandhi keeps defending it, saying Congress is there for uniting India. It has, it is a good thing. It is united India, and it is because of Congress that there is some feeling for national independence, and the desire for home rule is the same as the existence of National Congress. And he denies, as I already said, that Congress is an instrument for perpetuating British rule. And one by one he praises all of them: Octavian, Hume, Wedderburn, Gokhale, Tayyabji, Nauroji, all the founding leaders of the Congress. He says, whether they are Indian or foreign, you must appreciate the work done by all these leaders, right. Dadabhai Nauroji, who is the author of Indian nationalism, Gokhale, who is a great leader, who has done a lot in the past and has done much for Indian education, and many other such things. So, it is a defense of the old people, but this defense does not mean that he agrees with them. He is going to actually challenge them, and he is going to disagree with them on all the points that they make, but he is saying you have to respect. Then this is one thing, this is a historical moment. In 1905, a viceroy called Lord Curzon, he decides that for administrative purpose Bengal is too big, Bengal province. So, he takes a decision without abruptly to partition, to break it up into two parts. This is something that the nationalists of the time opposed, fiercely opposed, and there was a sustained campaign. They never let go until in 1911 Bengal, there was a reunification of Bengal, and of course subsequently there is also a kind of reconstitution of provinces according to language. Now, Gandhi is saying that the real awakening, that is the real desire for freedom and the appreciation of the atrocities of colonial rule happened when this happened, this partition happened. But then it is also an unfortunate thing, because it has also led to the split, between the moderates and the extremists. Those who wanted to adopt violent means, and those who are much more doing the petitioning. So, Gandhi himself is neither a moderate nor an extremist, and he is a combination of things, but he is not, you can't slot him into either one of those positions, because they are older positions, because he is obviously wants to be non-violent, no violent action, but that does not make him a moderate, because the moderates are adopting a certain kinds of strategies which are very gentlemanly, very civil, very petitioning mode, etc. So, that is, he says, that is when people realize that it is not enough to go on giving petitions, you have to back it up with force. So, force means coming into the streets on the public, demonstrating, but non-violently, and so on. So, this is a new movement that he is.
You get a little bit into most the recent event of dividing
the partition.
Yeah, partition.
That's it. Yeah.
Just last week. Something.
Oh, the Telangana. Yes.
What was that?
Telangana. Well, I come from that very place. It's not yet happened. The announcement has been made. It's a state, and yeah. It is an interesting case, because it has some of the characteristics of the colonial decision are still to be found, because there is a central government which sort of acts on its own, it does not take people into consideration. So, there is that relation between colonial government and people, some aspects of it continue to be there, and it is showing in this also. This is basically one state which is one language, majority language, but in that state there are two parts. One part was ruled by a Nizam, a Muslim kind of ruler, whose rule was very different. There was a lot of landlordism, very powerful sort of landlords, and there is a very cruel kind of policing system, and so on. And there was a communist movement in that region, armed struggle, and the Indian government, after partition, after independence, basically sent the army into Hyderabad to occupy it, and the Nizam sort of surrendered, and there was some amount of fighting, and there are reports of many thousands having been killed in the Muslims having been killed in that process. Anyway, so the subsequently that part, because the language was the same as this other part which was under British rule, they were merged into one. But the people of that region were not happy with that from that early time, and so there was for every 10-15 years there would be a demand that we want a separate state. So, it is finally now it seems that the state will actually be given. That is what. So, the Congress and its officials and the partition of Bengal. Now, here again, in the third chapter he is talking about discontent and unrest. That is, there is discontent with the British rule, they are saying there is unhappiness, and it is building up, and unrest means all kinds of demonstrations are going on, people are indulging in protests and other kinds of activities, expressing their discontent and so on. So, Gandhi says, well, that's good. Discontent is what is needed in order to actually proceed towards action to realize your goal. And as you were saying last week, that that moment, this is the moment, that shame and the recognition of national identity and so on, right? Then he tries to define Swaraj, because Swaraj is already in use. People are using Swaraj. It's not that he is, but he says, what is Swaraj? And here is his critique of existing notions of Swaraj. So what he says is, the people who are now fighting for Swaraj, the extremists in particular, they want to expel the British, but they want to keep the form of government. English rule without the Englishmen. And he says, this is not what I want, this is not Swaraj. And again, he also talks about the Japanese model of development, which of course was based on adoption of Western methods. And again, he says that's not very suitable for us. But again, he cites Japanese, not here in this text, but in another place. He admires the sense, the self-respect, which obviously he feels that the Indian population lacks in some ways. And that's what national movement is about, instilling a sense of self-respect so that you feel dissatisfied with your condition, right? Saying, I am in a state of slavery. Now, interestingly, he turns to the condition of England. Now, obviously the reader has been made to ask this question about the condition of England. What is this? Why when you talk about Hind Swaraj, it's very interesting that you should go to the condition of England, because after all, you're saying, who cares what the condition of England is? We want to worry about our condition, but no. After looking at the National Congress and the discontent in India, he is turning to the condition of England. And there he says it's a pitiable condition. The working class is suffering, there's misery all around. And it's when you think about the fact that he's an Indian, and that the Indian people are in considerably worse situation than the British working class, possibly, it acquires a new kind of significance. And then he has these harsh kind of statements. English Parliament, he dismisses Parliament. He says it's a sterile woman and a prostitute, and cites Thomas Carlyle, another of his inspiring figures, the talking shop of the world, a costly, and then he calls it a costly toy. That is, he says, what happens there? What kind of rule is that? That it's it produces nothing. That's why it's sterile, and then it's a prostitute, right? Some of those quotations. These members are hypocritical and selfish. The best men are supposed to be elected, but obviously the best men are not elected. And so on. A number of Parliament has no real master, right? And you can certainly bribe them, people with honors, and so on. So the Parliament as a instrument of rule is not serving the British very well, right? And so here is where he introduces the idea of a disease, right? Not the fault of the English people, but the condition is due to modern civilization. It's a civilization only in name. Under it, the nations of Europe are becoming degraded and ruined day by day. So suddenly, for somebody who is supposed to think about his own country's misery, he starts thinking about the misery of the Europeans and their sorry state. So you can also see that this is a very unrealistic kind of thing. You know, he is ignoring actual historical context, and he is deliberately not taking on the idea that there is something fundamentally wrong with Indian conditions, apart from the fact that the British are ruling, that there is some social issues to be, he wants to not accept on any front any sort of shortcoming of India. India will not be subject to criticism, only the West will be subject to criticism. There is one thing here. So it's more like a disease, and so they are not responsible for it, it's destroying them, and you must save them from it. That is, India will now have to save the British from the disease that they have. Okay. Now he goes into a question of the civilization itself. Having said this modern civilization is the source of the problem, he goes into what is civilization, right? So then he puts a lot of questions. There are better houses. Is that civilization? So he finds that a very trivial thing, right? People are happy. Is that civilization? No, it's according to him, it's not. Right? Machinery, trains, etc. And there is this kind of, you press a button, right? So he's like, he gives these kinds of examples. He's debunking the idea of progress, right? They will press a button and they will have their clothing by their side. Actually, this kind of technology is not available still. They will press another button and they will have their newspaper. I am on page 36 of this. A third button and a motor car will be waiting for them. And they will have a variety of delicately dished up food. Everything will be done by machinery, and so on. So this is a picture of this technologically, the utopia, which of course, is there. But somehow for him, he seems to think that it's inherently problematic. It cannot be a good thing to have this, because people are enslaved by the temptation of money and the luxuries money can buy. So earlier it was very difficult to send a letter, so only a few people used to send it. Now he says anyone can send a letter, and so anyone can abuse his fellow by means of a letter by 1 penny, right? So in the past, people used to have 2 or 3 meals consisting of homemade bread and vegetables. Now they require something to eat every 2 hours. So you can see that this is all highly rhetorical, imaginary sort of constructions meant to obviously poke fun and satirize, so that they have hardly leisure for anything else. And so this civilization is full of this seeking after pleasures and making life more and more comfortable, eating more, just becoming useless, and so it takes off. So it says this civilization takes note neither of morality nor of religion. So morality, and religion are out of the thing. It seeks to increase bodily comforts, and even that it doesn't do for very well. And here is something for women. It says women who should be the queens of households wander in the streets, or they slave away in factories, right? For the sake of a pittance, 500,000 women in England alone are laboring under trying circumstances in factories or similar institutions. And the suffragette movement, he says, is because of that. But obviously it's, but for him the breakup of the old moral code, the social structure of the pre-modern world is that disaster, according to this. So it says it's a satanic civilization and it's going to self-destruct, right? parliaments are really emblems of slavery. And then says we should cease to blame the British. They deserve our sympathy. They are a shrewd nation, and I believe they will cast off the evil. They are enterprising, industrious. They are not inherently immoral. They have just become immoral for some reason, which is, they are not bad at heart. I respect them. Civilization is not an incurable disease. Edward Carpenter, one of the people from where he gets this idea, he has an essay in that book, it's called Civilization, Its Cause and Cure. So obviously it's already defined as a disease. So it's actually quoting from, almost not directly, but it's the idea is taken from Edward Carpenter. Now this is one of the interesting things, is that much of this is said by people in Britain, right? They are actually watching the industrial, in Marx's Capital, if you read the center, those parts which are based on the labor inspectors' reports about the conditions in the factories. These are some of the most dreadful things you can, it's a shocking kind of things, the conditions under which they work. Obviously it was, and people are writing about it, people are protesting about it, people are then taking different, Marx and Engels took a particular approach, certain socialists like Edward Carpenter and others took a particular approach, people like Ruskin took a different kind of approach, and people are responding from different positions to the same thing. It is the case, right, that the conditions of the working class in England is something quite horrific, hellish, and they are writing about it. Now Gandhi is making use of it for a different purpose. He is not directly observing either of any of these things. He is not going and checking out the conditions in the hospital, factories or anything like that. He is using that in order to give a diagnosis, and then for his own purposes to make an argument which which gives him that vantage point from which to argue this. Now the next chapter is even more interesting in terms of the writing strategy adopted by the author. Oh, I don't have one. That is, why was India lost? Now here again he wants to throw a surprise at us. He says, why was India lost? Because the British came and conquered us, and they had all these superior arms, and they were greedy, and they were bad, and they were satanic, and so on. No, he is saying no. India was not lost to the British because of them, because it's because of us. We are responsible, right? We are ourselves responsible. It's because we were greedy, we were fighting. Now here is a self-critique, right? This is saying Indians had something, there was some problem. The English did not take India, we gave it to them. We keep them, we allow them to stay here. It's our weakness, not their strength, right? And it's because everybody was greedy, they wanted to become rich. So you help the British to fight another Indian, right? Two Indians are fighting, the British come along, and you say, you come with me, I'll give you something, you help me to fight my neighbor, and so on. This kind of internal rivalry.
Is this somehow referred to the British enter Old Delhi?
Sorry?
It is a story of the Delhi, they are infighting, then invite the British enter Delhi city.
Yeah.
Is he referring something like that?
Yeah, there are many such stories. For instance, in Mysore, Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan was one of the most successful people in fighting the British. He actually defeated the British twice. But then the story. These stories, the historical accuracy one can't say, but the story immediately says that there was some internal person who betrayed and so on. Even in Calcutta, in in Bengal, in Palasi, that story, there is another story of betrayal.
Similar story.
Right. Yeah. Inviting the British in and so on. These kinds of things. So that's the background to this narrative. Right. Now, interestingly, here, having said West has a disease, here he says India also has a disease. Right. On page 40, he says, if you pose as a physician for the disease of India, you will have to find out its true cause. So he doesn't actually come out and say India has a disease, but if you want to find out the disease, you have to look closely and find the true reason. And the true reason is that greed of some people which led to fighting among Indians, and to the advantage of the British. We keep, on page 41, we keep the English in India for our base self-interest. So this is an interesting argument, because our base self-interest makes it look like all Indians base, but obviously it's the self-interest of some versus the self-interest of others and so on. So in other words, Gandhi cannot actually treat the India as a place where there are class conflict, caste conflict between regions, interests, different interests and so on. He has difficulty in doing that. He can only do so indirectly. He cannot take into account differences in India as a direct, open sort of set of factors. It's one of the things, because it's of course there is the purpose being nationalism. Now, having previously looked at the condition of England, we are now coming to the condition of India. Right? If you remember, in the chapter called Condition of England, he says, on the first page, on page 30, he says the condition of England at present is pitiable. And on page 42, in the condition of India, he says it's a sad condition. Both are in miserable conditions for different reasons, obviously. Yeah, so let's resume our survey of this, and quickly, so that we can also discuss some, because. So why was India lost? We went through that, and now we are into condition of India, which is also pitiable. So we have become enslaved by modern civilization. We are believing everything that we hear about Western civilization, and so Gandhi defends Indian ways of living as better than, and he continues in the condition of India, the next section, and again it's a critique of modernity, right? Modern technology, modern professions, everything. You will see in the next few chapters. So here it's the railways. Railways are bad. Now, if you look at Gandhi's whole political career, without the railways, there is no Gandhi. I mean, seriously, literally speaking, because Gandhi travelled all over India in trains, and at every station, large crowds used to come to greet him, to see him, and so on. And this is how a mass following was built for the national movement. Right? So, actually speaking, Gandhi is not possible without railways. But here is this condemnation of the railways, in which he says, what do the railways do? They make you go fast. You are not supposed to go fast. God made us, with two legs. God didn't give us wheels because He wanted us to go slowly, walk. Right? And so on. And therefore, going fast and using a train is again a source of evil, right? So you travel on foot in bullock carts and so on. That's what is good. And then he talks about the pilgrimage centers, how all over India there were pilgrimage centers. People used to actually go by bullock cart or walk and go all over India and so on. And so he paints a very romantic portrait of an India which is free from all these fast modes of transportation, right? And then the question of Hindus and Muslims. Here he is making a serious point, suddenly in the middle, which is saying Hindu and Muslim does not constitute a division which is somehow detrimental to national unity. He is saying that's not, there is no need to think that you can have national unity with religious diversity. It is possible, right? It is a serious argument about the fact that the people of different religions can coexist, right? And then blames the British for having invented the Hindu-Muslim enmity, Hindu-Muslim division. He says is invented by our mutual enemy, which is the British, right? As a third party. And of course, the question of the cow comes there, saying, what about the cows? The Muslims eat them. So he says, well, you should, if you are a Hindu, you should defend the cow, but if the Muslim wants to eat it, you should plead with the Muslim, saying, don't eat cows. But if they want to eat it, you should not kill them. You should not do violence to them, and so on, right? I mean, this comes up with the untouchables also, because untouchables also are beef eating communities. Then the lawyers, he attacks the lawyers. He himself is a lawyer, mind you. He trains, and he worked as a lawyer in South Africa. But he says, the lawyers are essentially, sort of exploiting the people. It's an immoral profession, and this whole idea of rights-based law and talking in a language English. I mean, that's again an interesting point that he makes. That these they all function in English. The people don't even know. But the irony of it is that in India, in independent India, the courts continue to function in English, right? So some of these things are the contradictions of the India's independence we should keep in mind. And doctors, most shockingly, doctors, he says doctors, that again, like lawyers, they are doing nothing. They are not doing any good. And he gives the most amazing kind of example for criticizing doctors. Nobody would have thought of it except Gandhi, which is, he says, somebody overeats, they should suffer for overeating. But what does the doctor do? He gives medicine and he feels better, and again he overeats. So you are actually encouraging a bad habit, according to the. So this is his critique. It's these are some of the places where the thing sinks to a certain level of absurdity. In fact, the doctors on this page 63, the editor of this Anthony Parel, he says, the comment is, hospitals are institutions for propagating sin. This is Gandhi's comment, for which the footnote 118, he says, surely one of the most intemperate statements in the entire book. So there is that extreme sort of, and sometimes absurd comments on this. And then the question of what is true civilization, So again, India has the best of it, and nothing can equal the seeds sown by our ancestors. And then he compares it with other places. Says Greece has gone, the Pharaohs gone, Japan has become westernized, China, nothing can be said. He doesn't know what to say. But India is still there. It's just very strong, right? India is immovable, and that's her glory, right? So what is this true civilization according to him? According to him, the thing is that India is a true civilization, a good civilization, because they already know everything, what is good and what is bad, and they have decided against what is bad, right? And they have, that is why, for instance, this whole idea that India has no history, that everything is the same for thousands of years. which are usually, see, people like Karl Marx and others are supposed to have said, the British have said. But he says the same here actually. He says, we have managed, on page 68, we have managed with the same kind of plough as it existed thousands of years ago. We have retained the same kind of cottages, and our education also is the same. So there is his own picture of stagnation that he presents, and actually presents it as a virtue, that is a good thing, right? Because so basically the point is that there is in India the moral framework is given more importance, and greed, human sort of weaknesses are subject to the moral framework, and therefore there is a restraint upon greed and so on. And becoming free, so what do we do to become free? Now here is where the Swarajya is interestingly redefined by Gandhi, and this is very crucial to his whole outlook on life, and I will just spend a couple of minutes trying to elaborate on that. Swarajya. Now Rajya means kingdom, that is country, place, right? Swarajya means a state or a nation which is ruled by the people of that state, right? Swarajya. Now this is what other people mean when they say Swaraj, most of the others. What Gandhi is saying is not rule of the kingdom by us. That's not what he means. What he means is rule of the self, that is yourself. The person has to rule themselves, that is, you have to learn to dominate your own self, and that is true Swaraj. So what is he doing? He is turning it into a matter of conscience and individual self discipline, right? This idea that self discipline is the first thing. There is no need to drive the English away. That is not what is needed. What is needed is to learn to rule yourself. Now we can ask the question whether this has any remote connection even with, say, the Enlightenment principle, that autonomy. Is it a question of autonomy? But interestingly, autonomy in the Kantian sense, for instance, in what is enlightenment, Kant says, you should get out of the tutelage of others and become independent, free, think for yourself, right? Now Gandhi is not necessarily saying that, entirely that, because one of the crucial differences is the question of conscience. If the law is bad, you should not follow it, because your conscience tells you not to follow it. In Kantian idea of enlightened citizenship, that's not, it's the exact opposite. He says you obey the law, whatever the law is, but in your public life you can write a critical, you can criticize the law in outside of that. When you are working, if you are a cog in the machine, you are a member of a citizen, if you should not disobey the law. That's the different thing. You may disagree with it, but you should express your disagreements as a public intellectual, right? That is the new idea of citizenship and public individuality and freedom and autonomy that the Enlightenment thought brings into play. But this conscience is as you can see, it has that religious dimension, right? The church, like typically the religious figure has there's an appeal to conscience which will override the rules of the state, the laws. The law may say something, for instance, typically when you have a confessions, church confession, the priest is divided whether if somebody comes and says I killed somebody in a confessional box, do you have to tell the law that the murder has been committed, right? It's kind of the difference between conscience as a and what conscience tells me to do and what the law tells me to do. When that is happening, Gandhian point is that you should follow your conscience. But there is also a question whether Gandhi means it to be for everybody or only for the leadership. It's a question, because obviously it would be a very different scenario if everybody were to follow conscience, because Gandhi is not very happy with dissenting people within a national movement, right? Because if it's conscience, everybody has conscience, you can work it out like that. You can say, because that's your conscience tells you what to do, you do that. But it's not, obviously it's not happening like that. So therefore there is a interesting kind of shift that Gandhi tries to bring in, where Swaraj means disciplining the self. So on page 73, Swaraj has to be experienced by each one for himself. It is not necessary for us to have as our goal the expulsion of the English. That need not be our goal, he is saying, right? If the English become Indianized, we can accommodate them. If they wish to remain in India along with their civilization, there is room for them. They can stay, but they become like us and so on, right? So he is redefining the idea of Swaraj. That is, if we become free, then India will be free. And how do we become free? We learn to rule ourselves. It is Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves. Page 73 again.
Page 68,
Ah.
note 127.
Yeah.
This is one of the, I guess, interpretation of Gandhi, right?
Right, Bhagavad Gita.
Trying to suggest that self-control
Yeah.
means control over the mind.
Mind.
So the mind is
Yeah.
the key.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the ruling, the self is ruling the mind, ruling, disciplining yourself. So, which is a kind of, which later he calls it soul force, Atma Bal, right? Which is defined in individual terms, but everybody acquires it, and then that's the freedom. According, it's a new definition of freedom itself. This Bhagavad Gita, this is a kind of text which has it was not like the Quran or like the Bible at all. It was a literary text, but it was pulled out and it became something of a sacred text for some people, right? And Gandhi was one of those who claimed to be greatly influenced by this text, in which basically what happens is that in the Mahabharata, when the war is going on, when the war is about to start, Krishna, the god, tells Arjuna, because Arjuna is saying, but all of those people on the other side are my cousins, my uncles, my grandfather, how can I kill them? Right? He has a moral conscience, sort of emotional sort of dilemma, right? So basically the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's philosophical kind of exposition of what he calls, action without consideration of the consequences, without the fruit of action, without thinking about the fruit of action, right? So you have to act without expectation of some result which for some personal sort of reward or good result or whatever. You have, because somebody else, I am in charge. God is in charge. God knows what is right and wrong. You don't have to worry about it.
There's a certain point, there's a division between Gandhian, I don't know whether his system, at least the term, the separation between the body and the mind
Yeah.
and the soul.
Body, mind, and soul. Yeah, that is that's the Gita itself has that kind of. See, the intelligence is different from the Atma. And Atma is the soul. That is the immortal soul. The intelligence or the mind is the part of it is an emanation of the bodily itself. That is what perception enables. So it's a result of the perception. So cognition, etc. These the lower functions of understanding, cognition, perception, and so on, which are what you employ in your everyday experiences, right? That is, as a human being living on earth. But the soul is that which is immortal, which belongs in another dimension. So it's not affected. So the soul is like as the Bhagavad Gita puts it, it cannot be wounded by weapons, it cannot be disturbed. Water will not make it wet, and fire will not burn it, and so on. So its immortality is thing.
So it's a higher order. So
Higher, yeah.
So because you would imagine the self-control over the soul would be the highest order, right?
Right.
But he's actually focusing on the mind. Is that correct? Or
No, he is not employing that particular doctrine in its purity. What he is saying here is that the soul here is in some ways defined only in relation to the existent, not in that pure immortal form. I mean, that belief is there behind it maybe, but it's not. That is not what is the thing here. What is being brought in here is that the religious attitude which takes that kind of a disposition, which says, I am the soul and not the body, right? That is, I am that which is immortal, not that which is mortal and subject to the time and the weather and so on, right? So it's a question of defining one kind of force against another kind of force. That is the brute force, which is the force of violence, of weapons and everyday violence and so on, as against the force that comes from inner strength. So in that sense, it is. It's not strictly defined according to those those definition, those kinds of attributes, but that's what is meant. That that you have to. There are passages where it says your actions should not be governed by those kinds of mundane considerations of material gain. So that's what is also the Krishna's advice in the Gita, is that he says that the life of the soul is a different kind of life. That is, you detach yourself from all kinds of worldly existence and its pleasures and desires and so on, and act from that position of stability, sthita prajna. That is, you are not swayed by material forces. So that it's that kind of a thing. It's that kind of a discipline that is being also recommended here. So
we'll go back to Gita. Okay, Arjuna, after the whole night's agony, finally he did the slaughtering. Then here is what is in action, which is the
Right.
historical comparative, which repeats itself as a classic Greek tragedy, or it is just a kind of
No, there is no.
of your consciousness. Your conscience is speaking. Arjuna doesn't want to do it.
Yeah,
Cannot
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Finally, he did it.
No, see that contradiction which is already there in the Gita is here in Gandhi also.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing. The Gandhian, see, after all, what is Krishna telling Arjuna? He is saying, you go and kill them, don't worry. So Gandhi is not adopting that. Gandhi is selective in the way he adopts these things. He is not taking the Gita in its complete thing, right? Because otherwise it would be. That's why there is he is actually much more influenced in terms of religion by Christian ideas of passive resistance than by Gita. Gita is violent text. Gita says, who are you to decide whether or not you should kill your brother? I am here to take care of all the moral consequences. You go ahead and do your job. That's the kind of thing. So it's a mix. So Gandhi's world vision is a mix, and finally, if you examine it closely, it's a very contradictory mix. It's not. It doesn't have any coherence. It's incoherent, fundamentally incoherent. But that is why I was saying that the rhetorical strategy of adopting this position of speaking is far more important for its lasting influence than the substance of it. If you go into the substance, there is a lot of things you can point. For instance, to give you an example of the thing, if you do a textual symptomatic reading of this text, one of the things you find is Gandhi is constantly, in the olden days when literacy was a very privileged thing, only a few people, the ruling people had access to literacy. Ordinary people always used to say, it's written in books. Something you say, it's actually written in books. I'm not just saying it, it's written in books. You will see that Gandhi in this text keeps on saying throughout the text, it's written in books. And he is always citing, he cites one or two Indian books also, but he is actually citing Western books. If you go to the appendix of Hind Swaraj, you find a very interesting appendix on page 121, Testimonies by Eminent Men. What is the testimony? It's the testimony of the greatness of Indian civilization. Okay? So Gandhi is saying, don't believe me, it's written in books that Indian civilization is great. And to say, he says, the following extracts from Mr. Alfred Webb's valuable collection, if the testimony given there be true, show that the ancient Indian civilization has little to learn from the modern. So all of them, who are they? Victor Cousin, J. Seymour Key, Friedrich Max Müller, Michael Milhall, Thomas Munro, Wedderburn, Young, Abeduba. They are all Europeans. Now there is a particular interest to asking the question, why is it so? It's because Indians are not saying this. At this point in time, no Indian has said that Indian civilization is greater than Western civilization. In fact, throughout the 19th century, all of these people are saying, oh, we are very fortunate to be introduced to this great civilization. So they are contrasting Western civilization, which they like, which they think is good for India, for social reform, with British rule, which is bad, which is exploitative and so on. That is 19th century. Gandhi is the first person to say that this civilization is itself the greatest. Now what is happening in Europe on the other hand is, why are these people saying it? Because they are contrasting the new conditions of England and the other Western places with, for their own strategic purposes. Within that discursive space, they want to give a good account of somewhere else, saying that society is so religious, so moral, so upright. Why are we so degenerate? You see the strategic purposes of that. Now Gandhi is taking them as the proof of the great. So that kind of a contradiction. It's many things you can throughout the text. There will be these kinds of things. You know, books have been written about it. Great Westerners have written about it, and so on. So it's a it's an incoherent text in that sense. I mean, not just this text, but the Gandhian doctrine finally is incoherent. Where it is very consistent is not in the doctrine but in the practice. That is, whatever limited way Gandhian practice was initiated, whatever the criticism of it might be, it has to be said that Gandhian practice was consistent. It had to be of a particular kind. And there are Gandhians who have been extremely resilient, very intransigent upholders of certain values. That is, you may not believe in those values, but the way the Gandhians are firm in their in their fidelity to those values. So in that sense, the practical things, limited as they are, they have a certain consistency and thing. But the doctrine is highly contradictory, highly sort of incoherent. Yeah, so the true civilization is so the brute force which he opposes again, and then there is also a chapter on Italy and India where he refuses the Italian model, saying that while Mazzini was a great leader, Garibaldi's sort of way of proceeding was violence. Therefore, Italy has not the life of Italians has not improved as a result of this. They have succeeded in beating back the Austrian occupation, but it doesn't really amount to much, right? And therefore, he is again dismissing the extremists, and they who are saying that we need to armed struggle is necessary for achieving independence. He is saying no, this is not a good example.
Did he make any comment on the Turkish Atatürk? Because Atatürk is very influential in China's modernization.
Yes.
Version, but
No, in Atatürk, in that moment of non-cooperation, one of the things involved there is that the Turkish king is the caliph. It's an Islamic sort of position, and so the Western powers are trying to upstage this leader. So he, in fact, he makes a demand on the Western powers on behalf of Muslims, and that's one of the things that is included in the non-cooperation movement. Yeah, but not the modernizing. That's not not modernizing.
So because Mazzini and Atatürk, they were very similar.
Yeah, but that's not. It's not the modernizing. It's the caliphate that is. Right. So again, one of the other things which is very central to Gandhian thought, that is the harmony of means with ends. Means and ends must be. You can't use any means for achieving your ends. So he says freedom achieved by bad means is not freedom. That's what he means. So he gives this idea, he gives these examples of, that there is somebody has a watch. If you steal it, it is stolen property. If you ask for it and you receive it, it's a gift. If you give money and take it, it's a purchase. So he's saying means define the result. The result. So in other words, according to him, if you fight violently for independence, the result is something bad, and therefore, so these means and ends, according to him, have to be harmonized in some way. That therefore, non-violent means will be, are what will ensure the right kind of conclusion, that result. Right? Right. So, passive resistance, which is of course what is called satyagraha, which is Gandhi's own invention, this coinage, this term, although he had some help from the readers of the journal. Satyagraha. Satya is truth. Agraha is action, truthful action or something on those lines is what it means. And it's a term for passive resistance. So, passive resistance is what Gandhi advocates. And this is also the chapter, that is chapter 17, in which the question of the conscience and man-made laws, that you don't have to follow a law if you do not think it is, if you think it is unjust, right. So, you can, that you have to act according to your conscience rather than blindly obey the laws of a country. Right. So, a passive resistor on page 93 will say he will not obey a law that is against his conscience, even though he may be blown to pieces at the mouth of a cannon. Right. Education. On the question of education also, Gandhi's views are slightly out of key with modern ideas. He feels that all these education, general knowledge and science and all these things are useless because they don't build character. So, for him the most important education is that which builds character. So, moral education really. He seems to think that everything else is dispensable, and in fact he says as much, right. He says there is no need, and then the reader asks him, so how, but you are educated and aren't you using all the things that you learnt in your school and so on. So, he says, yeah, but he makes a distinction there which is actually quite interesting, which is that I am all right, that is I am not subject to the kind of ignorance, I know how to use my knowledge, right, as opposed to others who may misuse it or who may be spoilt, ruined by it, who may be enslaved by it. Machinery, again, as you can imagine by now, I think you know what he will say about machinery, that it just increases the misery of the people and it has no business. And here is where he mentions Dutt's Economic History of India, now 107. It is machinery that has impoverished India. It is a great sin. So, this sinfulness, the language is always the language of morality, sin, evil and good and evil. So, it is a religious sort of language, right. And this is where another interesting thing comes into view, which is, khadi, the charka, the hand wound thing. Now, in this chapter against machinery, Gandhi is advocating that, but actually if you read this footnote on page 109, Gandhi says handlooms, and he says when he wrote this he did not know the difference between a loom and a spinning wheel. He had never seen one. He was thinking purely in the abstract about these things, right, machinery versus hand thing, that is all he was thinking. He was not thinking about some actual thing. It was a concept of handmade versus machine made only, because it is only much later that he gets. So, you can read this. The idea of the spinning wheel, which has to become such a powerful symbol of the Gandhian revolution, came to him in a flash of insight rather than from empirical knowledge of the handloom industry. As he said in 1925, I had put forward my arguments in its favor in Hind Swaraj before ever having set my eyes on the spinning wheel. It was in London in 1909 that I discovered the wheel. I had gone there leading a deputation from South Africa. It was then that I came in close touch with many earnest Indians, students and others. We had many long conversations about the condition of India, and I saw as in a flash that without the spinning wheel there was no Swaraj. This is an interesting thing. He has not bent it, and he gets this idea. I knew at once that everyone had to spin. Everyone had to spin. But I did not know then the distinction between the loom and the wheel, and in Hind Swaraj used the word loom to mean the wheel. Even in 1915, when I returned to India from South Africa, I had not actually seen a spinning wheel. And then it's only later in Gujarat that he saw the loom, a loom. Right. So, in other words, that's the idea is that opposing the machine and defending handmade products. That is the abstract opposition which is at work here, right. So, here is the reader. He says on page 110, now you are using print medium to propagate your ideas. You are printing, that is also technology, that is machinery. How about that? So, he says, well, you have to use poison to kill poison. It's a sort of opportunistic kind of argument, right? For the moment. Concluding with saying that he is neither an extremist nor a moderate, he is only trying to bring them together. And he appeals to the British saying, just police India and be here, but don't don't eat beef and don't eat pork and so on. And again, one more interesting thing in this is when he says, what is the nation? Rabindranath Tagore has an essay on the nation. He understands what the nation is. In fact, he quotes Ernest Renan and others and says, this is the idea of the nation, and it's a new idea. We have to learn what it is. We have to understand what it is and what it means for us. Gandhi, on the other hand, has a distinctive idea of the nation. He says, what will you say? On page 115, editor says, who is the nation? And the reader replies, those of us who are affected by European civilization and who are eager to have home rule. Now, this is a very interesting definition, that the nation is only those people who, having come under the British influence, are desirous of home rule, not the masses, right. And that is in fact the definition that seems to prevail at this point. It is only later that it changes. And then there are a series of instructions to lawyers and so on that it ends with. I bear no enmity towards towards the English, but I do towards their civilization. So, it is what can you say? This is a text, as I said, where the rhetorical position taking strategies are far more powerful than the content is able to sustain. The content is, when you examine it closely, is unable to proves to be less convincing than the rhetorical sort of strategies. But it has remained a very popular text in the among the Indian intelligentsia, a very powerful text. Ashish Nandi, yes, is highly influenced by this kind of by this text and other. Of course, he is a Gandhian in the overall sense. For instance, when you say that the masses are better, they know they are not, they know more than us and so on. This is something that Ashish Nandi will say, for instance. It's a very strong point that Ashish Nandi often makes. The masses know, but we don't know.
It's basically a Naranic position.
Ironical.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only the Indian, the Russian Narodniki also took
Right.
that
Yeah.
position,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the continental
Right.
sentiment.
It's a kind of idea which separates you are different from the people you are leading. That's the essential idea, because we have become enslaved, but they are free and they are wiser. The people are wiser than us, but we are the leaders. So it's that kind of right. So please. Gandhi is one of the few people who had the most sensible approach to the language question. Actually, he had a sensible approach, but he also was subject to a lot of pressure from different forces in India to sometimes change his attitude. But on the whole, his and the whole Gandhian sort of fraternity, the Gandhian movement, generally took unfortunately, they took the right position, but unfortunately their position was dismissed by the independent Indian government. Their position was not respected by the Nehruvian government. Nehru went completely in a different direction. So this is the thing about Gandhianism. There are a few extremely useful, right approaches which Gandhian practice and Gandhian thinking has provided, but essentially Gandhianism remains, after independence, its practical domain, the domain of khadi, they became marginalized. They became, khadi, you can wear khadi, even today you can wear it, but this is not a holistic social thing, it's just one symbolic existence. So if you're in Gujarat, they'll have prohibition. On Gandhi's birthday, there'll be no liquor in the shops, these kinds of symbolic gestures. But otherwise, Gandhi is elevated into more and more divine, almost like a god on the one hand, and everything that he stood for is destroyed, that is set aside, ignored on the. So this is the sort of thing that the post-independence history of the presence of Gandhi in India's political life, social, in everyday life is, this is the thing.
Madhava, how do we, going through the text, how do we coming back to, in a way, position the entire text written in 1909, right? In the sense that it's very helpful, you map out in the very beginning, kind of the point of a dialogue, within which this text try to intervene or to be in dialogue. But so in a way, on one hand, it's highly rhetorical. But on the other hand, my imagination would be, because I don't know the Gandhian ideas and writing and practices as a whole, so it's nothing to locate, right? For instance, the language policy.
Yeah.
Right?
No, yeah.
105.
Yeah, 103.
Footnote said this is the first time a political leader
Yes.
gives a policy on language and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
So does that mean this is the beginning of formulating his ideas on different things, and later it's more developed or elements of this, and if I can ask the question, I mean, eventually people will be interested to know what the hell is a Gandhian principle? What is this? Does that, or are these elements already embedded in the text, or what? And nevertheless, I mean, people do look at this text as one of his most important pieces of writing and keeps going back to. So in that sense, how to locate either within his own system of thought and practices, or in some other way.
Yeah.
After effects. And
After?
After, in the sense that when this text was written around that time, 1910, 1920, was that already influential?
No. I mean,
And so
see,
on,
it is 1909, 1910. He is still in South Africa. He is
Yeah.
not in India. 1914, 15, that's when he returns to India. And he becomes, starts to climb in the Congress. He takes on people, the big leaders. He takes on Tilak, and there is so slowly he is coming. Now, the crucial thing Gandhi does, which changes the character of the Congress itself, is when he takes over as president of the Congress. So, 1919, 20, this period, what he does is he gives Congress a new structure, a new organizational structure based on the language policy that he has elaborated here. I mean, not based.
From the South African Congress, transport from, because he's very important role when he's in South Africa. He's also learned from the African Congress, right?
African Congress was set up when? I am not
Much
sure.
Earlier, very early.
Before the Indian national? I don't think so.
You know?
No, it is. I think it is actually based on this. That's my sense. But of course, South African experience is important. This is true. South African experience, and it's because Gandhi was there in South Africa. There is still a Gandhian presence in South Africa. The memory of all those days, that ANC, and there is a Congress. That whole discourse continues. Now, what he does is that, see, earlier they are all these people, middle class people, professionals, rich people, they are all members of the Congress. And what Gandhi does is he creates provincial committees. So, earlier it is what? The cities, Madras, Calcutta, Bombay, the big places, right? So, those are the centers. They are not thinking about people in, and how mobilization, etc. Provincial committee means that by language, based on language. So, you are actually seeing in the Indian subcontinent in its nationality, there are nationalities within the India. So, there will be somebody leading the provincial committee of the Andhra region, somebody for Bengal, somebody for Assam, each by language based. So, this means that there is a complete new revamping. So, Gandhi is actually putting into practice, even long before it actually becomes reality, a kind of linguistic nationality structure to India. And that is the source of his massive success. That is the basis. And this is where another crucial element has to be understood. The story I told earlier about all the Congress, how Congress was and how it became under Gandhi, it became successful and so on. This is the standard story. But the another part of the story is that with the partition of Bengal, that's why it is so important here. What happens is linguistic nationalism effectively acquires concrete reality. Bengal is the first, Andhra is the next, and one by one, the Sindhi, the Punjabi, the Assamese, the Oriya, and so on, they start thinking of themselves as nationalities. Already they've had a lot of language based movements, that is small scale among the literati, intelligentsia, but still they have had these throughout the 19th century. Missionaries and British officials have actually written grammars for these languages. They have produced anthologies of literature for these languages, and people indigenously, people have started to think of themselves as Telugus, Tamilians and Kannadigas rather than by their caste or whatever. This change is happening, and that is the context where Gandhi's strategy is a brilliant move to completely reorganize the Congress and make possible a much wider kind of base. That is the what leads to the kind of mass movements that the 1920 immediately it has its effect, right? Non-cooperation is a huge success. It's going on for couple of years. So there is that movement, that is, there are very active mass, relatively mass-based movements in the provinces. So so in that sense, within the Indian national movement, Gandhi makes several of these kinds of very pragmatic, very smart strategic moves in the fight. But after independence, none of this actually has any lasting effect. After independence, India becomes a regular modern nation state which wants to progress, wants to develop, wants to become one of the developed countries of the world and so on, in the normal sense of the term. And Nehru is the emblematic figure of that movement, right? So he becomes purely symbolic presence. So that's one. Apart from that, Gandhi also is very operating very strategically in relation to a number of very complicated social questions. One of them being the caste question. Whenever it comes to the caste question, Gandhi stands firmly on the side of a very conservative kind of socially stagnant kind of policy, where on the one hand he says Hindus must change their mentality, they must give up their caste habits, they must clean the toilets themselves and all these kinds of practical things which individuals, which is meant for individuals to practice. Just as he said, self-rule. This here he is defining freedom as self-rule, your own discipline. In the same way, his approach to caste is also to say that those who have been practicing untouchability should be ashamed of their practice and discipline themselves and learn to give up those kinds of things and live on equal terms with others. But in practice, whenever a political problem of resolution of the caste question comes up, he takes a position against any such moves for separate electorates and all those kinds of demands that say the community is making. So in that sense, pragmatic politics, very smart, and takes the nation. So you will find him saying the nation, being a very nationalist kind of very practical minded nationalist. At other times he is extremely impractical, right? He'll only live in a hut, in a simple hut. So for instance, Sarojini Naidu, this poet and who was one of those women who participated, he said it takes a lot of money to keep Gandhi in a state of poverty because it's a lot of expense, because he has to be given all kinds of simple things. So and so on. So these kinds of contradictions. So wherever you're Khadi, for instance, Rabindranath Tagore, he's saying, what is this charka nonsense? He said, what, why, what for? What is this? Tagore was totally against this charka business. But Gandhi, no, every day, even whether he is here or whether he is in London, he has to do this thing, for 1 hour or 2 hours or something. So like that, so there is certain impractical sort of symbolic things that he very held on to with great sort of firmness. And on the other hand, he is doing practical politics in the very extremely shrewd politician, right? extremely, he calculates, he thinks about what is the right move to make at what time. And his other contribution is that in India, one of the reasons why he was acceptable to both the ruling classes and the masses was, so the masses of course, because he came across as a Mahatma, there was a certain enthusiasm, people wanted a leader, so he provided that leadership which others were not in a position to provide. So that was why the mass following was so widespread. But the ruling classes also were happy with him because he was the kind of person who introduced this way of dealing with the masses. So he could bring them out and then he would send them back when he wanted. This was the most important element in Congress strategy, politics, that Congress was not in favor of mass action, of independent mass action or by any other. So the main thing is, if you call them out, God knows what they will do, like Chauri Chaura, they will resort to violence. So, but Gandhi, he said no more non-cooperation, finished, put an end. Masses are misbehaving, right? They are doing things which we are not supposed to do. So you can mobilize and demobilize at will. So this is a tremendous kind of thing, and so you can use the people when you require them to come out on the streets, and you don't do anything, and sometimes you just you just go to prison and you leave them, you don't worry about what will happen to them also, right?
Well, what is the analysis here? Because it's moral power or rhetorical power, or
yeah, I mean that power which is comes from this kind of Mahatma sort of image, right? Mahatma is a very great spiritual leader, great soul. Mahatma literally means great soul. So it's a term which might often be used for a spiritual leader, a religious leader, not for politicians. So he was in politics, but at the same time he was above politics, right? He is this sort of exemplary, iconic figure who had all these certain properties which was associated with sages, hermits, rishis, whatever, austerity, uprightness, incorruptibility, simplicity, and all of these kind of things. So it was a religious kind of appeal. So, I mean, it didn't always succeed. He would go on fast. For instance, fasting is one of the things that he employed. Now, fasting is not a specifically Indian thing. The Irish employed fasting, right? Bobby Sands, died in 70s or 80s. Fasting. So, whenever somebody was moving in a particular direction, so for instance, next week we'll talk about it. So, if somebody was taking a political move which he didn't like, he goes on fast. And then everybody has to protect him, right? Because he is that symbol of Indian unity, national freedom, etc. So in order to protect him, there will be great pressure on the other people to suspend, to not do whatever they were planning to do. So sometimes people had to act against their own inclinations just to save Gandhi from his own fasting and so on, like that. But again, in 46, 47, in that period, when the partition, before and after partition, that period, the violence, people are killing each other. In Calcutta, there is tremendous, and he goes on fast, but didn't work. So he is also, there's sometimes communal clashes. People didn't pay heed. It does not always work, but it works. I mean, it works on the leadership, the other members of the Congress party and other leaders. It may not work on the people on the ground always. So
he has a kind of a surrealistic quality, which is surrealistic.
Surrealist.
Which is fascinating in a sense, it is sainthood image, like in the Salt March.
Right.
The way he performed is
Yeah,
all
that was.
over the world. Just have the newsreel.
Yeah,
Look
yeah.
at this small man,
Yeah.
every action.
Yeah.
Which
Yo,
is
that was a brilliant
very-
move. He just he just started from one place and kept walking. Initially there were only a small number of people.
So being a Raja,
Huh?
being a Raja, how did he able to? Is it were there any crashes between those provincial Assam, those elites of different provinces?
There was any
Being a
Gujarati. Huh.
Gujarati,
Huh.
and were there any crashes or cooperation between those provinces?
Yes, that's what these provincial committees in the Congress party, Congress itself, he set up these things. So there were leaders from every province. So it's the leadership, there is a central leadership and then there are provincial committees, provincial leaders. So they are looking after the movement in those respective provinces. So they gather. So there is every year a Congress used to hold a annual meet, usually in December of every year. They would meet in some different places, and that's when all of them from different parts gathered. Yes, they had connections like that. Is that what you are not? That's not.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not sure about my question.
No.
That was,
Maybe you should say it in Chinese then some. Okay, sorry.
You.
the identity stuff.
Identity questions.
The role of identity.
No, for instance, the text was written in Gujarati.
Yeah.
That's part of her question, right?
Yeah. Now, see, English is the medium for people to get together. Congress meetings, English only. Until Gandhi came, Gandhi introduced Hindi. But that was also difficult for many people from the south and other places. They didn't know Hindi. But somehow they managed to combine English and Hindi. So, this is how they worked as far as language is concerned. Now, the other question about whether Gandhi's leadership, see, Gandhi, precisely because he had English education, he had that kind of a persona which was associated with the whole formation that colonial India is. So, such people transcend their provinces. Their identity is above their provinces, right? The ones who are English educated, they are the Indians. That's why here it says, who is the nation? Those who are educated in English and so on. So, for them, their province doesn't matter. They speak and write in those languages, but they are part of the national elite, the leadership of the movement. Yeah? So, yeah, he was able to overcome that.
I don't know what to say. I mean, this is actually a very astonishing statement, right?
Which one?
Those who have affiliation with English,
Yeah.
this is the nation,
Yeah, exactly.
right? It's like when we say, who is Indian?
Right. It's
Around
India.
that time, right, without another language called Hindi in place, even until I have no idea.
Yeah.
According to his policy.
Yeah.
Of language.
See, the main problem is that India is so diverse that it cannot actually in any practical way be called a nation. It's a federation of nationalities. In fact, Gandhi is one of those who agreed on that. He said India is a multinational kind of setup. So that's why he restructured the Congress, because it has to reflect the actual conditions on the ground, right? The people, the ones who actually denied that reality and tried to call it a nation is the Nehru and the BJP, the Hindutva party. They are the ones who insist on treating it as a nation. Gandhi did not actually. Gandhi understood that there are differences, which are nationality sort of like differences. And the Gandhian movement, in fact, was very, very centrally involved in trying to insist on the language policy being implemented in independent India, the same language policy. But Nehru actually didn't implement it. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure do I catch up with the whole
Okay,
course,
okay.
but I want to ask that Gandhi was actually establishing his own system of thought through rhetoric strategy during the stage, right?
His own system of?
His system of thought, his
Thought.
own system of thinking.
Yeah,
System of-
yeah,
at
yeah.
the stage.
Okay, yeah,
Can
I
say
suppose.
that?
Yeah,
So can we see that at the stage, Gandhi was kind of making knowledge preparation for future colonial independence or national independence?
Mm.
Can I say that? He was now making this knowledge preparation
for the
kind of
future.
preparation for future
For-
becoming national independence.
For the
or
future.
colonial
Okay, okay.
independence.
So, I mean, like in a text like this, he is actually trying to prepare the Indians for
Yes.
independent existence.
Can I say that?
Well, yeah, well,
Because the republic was not established until 1950, right?
yeah, but at the same time, I mean, at one level, it's true in the sense that Gandhi thinks that individual, discipline, self-rule in his distinctive sense is a requirement for any free country. So, in that sense, what you are saying would be right, that he thinks that the future India, which is free, will be like this, where everybody learns to discipline themselves, rule themselves, and be resistant, perform their duties, and so on. But at this point in time in Indian history, the idea of a republic is not strongly present in the minds of people.
So he was making the preparation.
He was preparing something called freedom. I don't think that he had a concrete political form in mind, because a republic, he has already dismissed it. The Western state for him is an evil. So some idea of freedom, some future, you are right, but not necessarily what came into existence. The republic. Some other idea of the future. Yeah. I mean,
I would like to suggest the reading of this text from two perspectives. One, it is a kind of more or less, talking for himself, it sounds to me, when he's in Africa, he's not yet go back to India, and there's not clear future of the picture of what India is supposed to be, but he knows a lot of things India should not be.
right.
I think that's important. Just like a Fanon finally said, after the revolution, if we follow the West, we are dying.
Right.
We are self-defeating.
Yeah, yeah.
That sentiment, he got it. He knows what India doesn't want to be. So in a sense, preparing India's future, it is endowed, especially endowed in the engineering sense. He's against engineering, especially political engineering or social engineering. So the way I read this text, I think it is important, and even now for the other third world countries, that actually he opened a big can of worms. That's the function.
Say it again.
Okay.
Big.
Can of worms.
A can of worms. He opened up all the questions, all the contradictions,
Yeah.
all the possibilities and impossibilities. And the third world country sooner or later will come up against
Yeah.
without ready-made answers.
Sure.
That's the marvelous thing.
Yeah.
This text. nationalist or whatever discourse is totally opposite. Try to cover it, close, okay, suture, and make all the problem and close, and it doesn't show up and becomes a very simple Republican, okay, nationalist or anti-colonial kind of a simple propagandist or self-intoxicated ideology. But the Gandhian thing is on the opposite. He doesn't give you a ready-made answer or perspective, but actually he opened the Pandora box. Okay.
This is an interesting
Which
comment.
I
Yeah.
think made this text even today becomes interesting. Okay. That's pedagogical in this sense. We look at Gandhi and say, all these funny words still exist in our very present political system, and we're never willing to look at it even closely or
Yeah.
consciously. So that's how I suggest this text to be read in the position. I don't know how.
Anybody else has an idea? Yes.
I was wondering if the Gandhi is neither the editor nor the reader, or he's both at the same time. So
It's both. Yeah. Sure.
we always associate it to the editor, but actually the reader for me is also kind of tendency of Gandhi himself.
Yeah.
Because each time the reader is exactly asking the good question.
Right.
of Gandhi.
You're right.
So that's why I don't think there is a theory, or I don't feel like there is a theory, or you say it's incomplete or incoherent. So I mean, it's part of the strategy or rhetorical strategy.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if people read it as Gandhi is the editor, or do they try to say like?
No, I mean, there is well, one or two things you can say about it. I mean, one can't say whether how people read it, but there are indications here. One thing is, Gandhi claims that this reader editor question answer model is based on the fact that he had conversations with people in which they said something and he said something. So he is turning that into question answer. That's one kind of answer. The other is that he obviously is making him ask the questions that he wants to respond to.
And a lot of time he say, we'll have to think about it. Like,
Yeah.
It's just proposition and okay, so but now still think, I will think about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting rhetorical strategy again. But there are also moments when the reader says, actually you are very good, your answers are very good. So, something on those lines. So it's and then he says, no, let's not get so this it's but on the other hand, what is interesting is that through this, whatever the strategy is, he is structuring the whole thing in such a way that he starts with the history of the Congress, right? How the Congress came into being. He does and how the national movement has is what it is based on, why it is so important. Then the conditions of England and what the civilization is, and so on. He has his own way of putting things, which wants to acknowledge everything, but also prioritize his own ideas, right? So that's why he spends a very little time in the beginning talking about Gokhale and all the others, and giving them their credit, and but so essentially it's a strategy to get all of those kinds of issues that he is interested in and give his opinions on them. Yeah.
But I think more interesting is that you have a third or fourth voice, which in the note.
Footnotes.
So when you read the note, it's funny. It must be.
No, the notes some are later.
Anthony Parel.
Yourself read the note, or it is something.
No, Anthony Parel's notes are added very recently in the 90s.
Very recent.
Yeah.
90s, yeah.
I'll show you some.
90s. It's an anthology with it has this and some other essays and letters and so on.
One other said we were one nation before they came to.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of.
There. This is also an assertion, you know. It's an assertion, pure and simple, that we were a nation.
Like he was not living before. It's like it's all about the past, and he said we have to come back to our civilization, like come home.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I was wondering if it's not related to his situation of exile, because it's a kind of literature of exile in a way, because he wants to come back home.
Right, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I actually think this text is impossible without South Africa.
Without South
So
Africa,
in
yeah.
other words, this text can only be written outside India,
Yeah,
right?
you're absolutely
I
right.
mean, especially the sense of discrimination, I think it's an important moment.
Yeah,
If he's inside, he's part of the population.
yeah,
and
yeah.
That thing,
Yeah.
I think it's a different moment.
No, absolutely.
And so in that sense, I think a way, this is actually funny situation. I mean, if we call Gandhi the national father, right? And another national father, Sun Yat-sen, is also foreigner. This is Hawaiian. I think, and doctor, one is lawyer, the other is doctor. Right?
Sorry, who are you talking about?
English education.
Father of Republic of China.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Also Hawaiian, whatever, base.
Okay,
And
okay.
there's one outsider view.
Right, yeah.
So imagine from the outside there is a totality called India. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah.
cannot be imagined from within,
Yeah.
even with the presence of the British.
No, that is absolutely correct. And that position, see, the Gandhi is among those who have a very intimate knowledge of Western
Yes.
world, who have actually gone there, who have had education, who have also acquired the sensibility. Gandhi writes excellent English, for instance. You know, he can converse very well with and so on. So these are the people. See, geographically separation apart, the outsider's definition of India is already happened through the English. The English are the outsiders. Like, like they say the word India, Indica or whatever, was, is a Western conception and partly an Arab, Muslim, outsiders conception. Hind and Indica and so on. These are all outside, and the British are actually the ones who have already constituted an idea of the whole through their fantasies. So India, in that sense, historical sense, in the way the Greeks talked about it or the Romans talked about it, the Mughals.
Queen Victoria is the queen of India.
Yeah, yeah. So that India has, so in other words, you are schooled into the idea of the whole through this very process of education. So when you become educated under the colonial rule, you are actually being schooled in Indianness, Indian identity by the British, right? It's also, that's already the case. So Gandhi are people, the Indians in other places, right? They are part of the empire. Now, why do Indians go there? Because it's part of the same empire. So they go to East Africa, they set up businesses there. In fact, Uganda in the 70s, it was that whole, Idi Amin came and expelled all the Indians because Indians were a big presence there. Kenya has Indians, all of these, British colonies, though they had that commerce in which Indians were very successful as businessmen, and on the one hand, that is the Western Indian business communities, and on the other hand, from the south, from the north, many workers were sent, laborers, indentured laborers, forcibly sent there to work in the plantations and other things, Caribbean, Fiji, South Africa, and so on. So this combined presence, and it's by the invitation of the business people that Gandhi lands up in South Africa. because they need somebody to represent them in the courts, and they don't have their own lawyers to trust. So they want an Indian lawyer, and Gandhi comes and takes on. So in the process, he transcends that particular role of representing the narrow interests. He becomes, he becomes something else. But that's a kind of given. So India is a commonly known thing for all of these kinds of people, the business people, the intelligentsia, and so on. Even when they are in India. So that's that conception is put in place by the British. And so this whole question, this whole assertion that India was their nation before. First of all, there are two things about it. One is it's a purely baseless assumption, assertion. Secondly, he is using the word nation there without thinking, without actually meaning nation, because he is all the time into civilizations. Whenever it suits him, he uses the word nation simply because other people are using it. So he is not yet conscious of the way that Tagore was conscious of the distinction between nation and civilization. He thought of them as two different things. Gandhi is actually using them almost interchangeably. It's not very serious sort of conceptually rigorous usage.
Is there any intended audiences of this dialogue, the book? Yeah. Any intent? I mean, are these questions and answers intended to be known by the masses, by illiterate Indians?
The literate, yeah, the middle class, not illiterate, no, not literate. Well, because it was first published in Gujarati language in South Africa and India, and then in India it was banned. Then the English one was translated and published, and I think it acquired a readership as the movement was becoming more and more sort of powerful.
Is there other language translation?
Yeah, of course. Hind Swaraj is in every language. Huh?
Chinese translation.
There is.
Chinese, I don't know. There is? Okay. Yeah. No, there are other languages.
Available on internet.
Yeah, it's one of those, emblematic, iconic texts. It's more. In 2009, which was 100 years of Hind Swaraj, there were a lot of conferences around this text. Many people, so there are a lot of new writing on this.
Will you be able to put your finger on the legacy of the text itself?
The legacy.
Of this text.
Yeah.
If we want to nail, what are the concrete legacies still happening? Or the larger question is actually the Gandhian legacy until today.
If
For
you,
instance, you put forward the issue of language.
yeah,
Because in a way, even Nehru did not implement it.
yeah, no, Nehru didn't.
But then the provincial language
Movement started.
predominant, that's one of the legacies.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And even without being able to have the Hindi to begin with
Mhm.
as a shared language.
Mm,
And in that sense, it's also a Gandhian legacy. In a way.
yeah.
Huh? I don't know.
No. Gandhian, in the realm of politics and economics, the Gandhian legacy is zero. In the economics. Economically, India is a completely now, there is nothing Gandhian about it.
So the wheel never worked.
No, never worked. The village economy, the wheel, all of these never worked. Politically, Gandhi has become a symbol of unity, but otherwise doesn't have. The Gandhians are not a big presence in political life. No. But everybody treats Gandhi as a symbol who cannot be criticized, whatever, like that kind of a thing. That's political. In social life, there are still certain institutions, Gandhian institutions, which in their own specific locations, in small ways, they do good work. I mean, they continue some of the Gandhian things like spinning, etc. But other than that, they are also trying to use some of the Gandhian ideas, but not in a pure form, but to actually help, say some village, some rural area and so on. And I think they do some interesting work. They are actually those are the ones I was referring to when I said they are very faithful to a certain doctrine, and in their practice they show a certain commitment to certain principles, and it's very admirable sort of thing. Among the intellectuals, there is again a kind of, what I feel is a kind of renewal of interest, especially in Hind, Swaraj and texts like that, for various reasons. For instance, Akhil Bilgrami, this philosopher of Indian origin who was in New York, Columbia University, he recently wrote, not recently means about almost 10 years now, a piece called Gandhi as Philosopher. And since then there have been a lot of writing which takes Gandhi's ideas, including Hind Swaraj, but also other texts, and tries to elaborate on the thought of Gandhi and give it a kind of consistency, which I personally feel it doesn't have. But anyway, there is a lot of interest in reviving interest in Gandhi. And Ashish Nandi, people like Ashish Nandi, and there is a very interesting new scholar, Tridip Suhrud, who is a very committed Gandhian. He wrote a book, Reading Gandhi, something like that. I think I have it here. I have given in the notes, there is a reference to the book, Tridip Suhrud, who is a scholar but also practicing Gandhian. That is, he actually gave up an academic job and went back to the ashram, Gandhian, institution, to work there and so on. And he writes interestingly on various aspects of Gandhi's work. So in that sense, there is a sustained interest in Gandhi, and there is a kind of some intellectuals who try to adopt Gandhian ways of thinking. Yeah, so it's there to some extent.
After independence, there was still a movement of civil disobedience.
See, after independence, if you do civil disobedience, it becomes anti-national. Right?
Really, so it was.
No. I mean, obviously, people go on strike. They do what is called dharna, which is a protest kind of thing, and different things which can be compared to this civil disobedience. But as I said, once Indians are ruling, they'll say this is against the nation. This is disruption of public life. This is they'll.
Even by people who haven't did practice of Gandhi, which cannot be accused of.
No, unfortunately, there are no such. No, see, because once with Gandhi's death, the Gandhians become a very marginal presence in Indian life. They are not all that powerful. They are not, able to, because see, Gandhi's own call for civil disobedience was mediated by the Congress party, right? So all of these other leaders had to go and start, mobilize and so on. That's how the whole thing worked. So when they become the rulers, then there is no, yeah, that's how, yeah.
So what was the reason for Nehru to abandon, to pursue the one nation? What's the threat or what's the pressure that he faced?
See, pressures are many. Well, for instance, India became independent. There was partition. There was a lot of violence. So many people were affected by it, and several thousands, great number of people died. It was brutal. It's a very traumatic thing. So, and then there was war with Pakistan also. That was a threat. There was an enemy, and so on. So basically a kind of siege mentality. Thinking that somehow we have to all huddle together. To be together. So if you divide according to thing, it's like you are breaking up. So this kind of fear. That's one reason. But the other reason is that the entrenched traditional ruling classes, the commercial classes in India, the castes actually, commercial castes and the professional castes, see the ones who were Indian in that earlier colonial sense, for them this unity was without this unity they were nowhere. Their superior position in public life would be destroyed, you see, because for them English was the capital with which they preserved their separate and superior existence. So, if you say each province will speak its own language, then it is detrimental to their interest. So, the bureaucracy, the professionals, the lawyers, doctors, engineers, etc., and the merchant classes like the Baniyas, the Marwadis and the Muslim, the Gujarat, there is a whole the Persian, I mean, Persian, some of them are from various regions, but anyway, they are Indians. All of them had an interest in a single market also, and they, and in fact, that is how they, in spite of Gandhi's essentially correct position on language, he often took a contrary position because of these pressures. The Marwadis were funding him to propagate Hindi in a different way than he was thinking about it.
Gandhi, I'm still trying to imagine, Gandhi's own system. In a way, he's very, very, I don't know whether he's very consistent. He disregard parliament, disregard machines, commerce, right? And positively, and also self-control, self-rule. So he wouldn't have a theory of the state.
Yeah.
He uses Congress to conduct mass movement without imagining Congress one day will be the ruling regime. Is this correct? This is pretty much. So in that sense, he says something you think this is rhetorical, but actually may not be the case. He say, it doesn't matter. When the British are still here, we learn self-rule. Even they're gone, we still have self-rule. But in regard to the ruler, you're self-ruling. Right? So I don't know. There's certain consistency to it. Even we hope British is out. But if they want to remain, they become like us. So in other words, it's a space without
without concrete concrete planning or anything like that.
You're not supposed to.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah, that's a point. In the sense that it's not, he himself will not come out and have a position on what it's going to look like, because he will, but he will say village industry, autonomous villages, every village will have its own government and all these anarchic and kind of ideas. But the essential thing is there is a way in which it's a self-contradicting kind of discourse, because on the one hand you are assuming an entity, a political entity which is as big as a continent, right? On the other hand, you are thinking about village as the unit of everyday life, of social life, practical. So the question is it that he didn't think about it at all, or he was actually assuming that it is already on the agenda, somebody else is thinking about it, right? So he will only propose those things which he thinks have no connection to concrete planning of state and other things, but other sort of questions, right? But he would always maintain that he has a plan, he can envisage a future, but everybody else thought that it was an impractical sort of thing. But whether he understood that it was impractical and still said it, that is the. On the other,
Yeah, I think
that's the crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, the whole thing absent, it is not without reason.
Mm.
Isn't the whole agenda of nation building
Right.
was absent. Okay, state making was absent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but it is not just naively.
Is
ignored.
the right.
It had a reason, which based on maybe a premature critique of nation making or state building,
Right.
which he doesn't really necessarily think that's got to have the only way. And Nehru is the opposite. Nehru is like, you have to do this. That's the only
Right.
way to do
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you don't think that way, I mean, if there is a Gandhian version of the state, vision of the state, right?
No, there is no vision. Yeah, of the
No,
state.
If there is such like, or
Yeah.
we build one for him consistent with his state principle, then Indian state may be different from today,
Ah.
right? Because if you don't say that, then Nehru come in without anyone to argue against,
Yeah.
and simply fill the gap, right? But I think Gandhi may have I think he can throw hand and say, we had rulers before, these whatever kingdom
Yeah.
or, right?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like that, and that would be a theory of the state, right? But he didn't say that.
No, but that's not sayable because nobody ever had that size, that kind of kingdoms are small.
Yeah.
The Mughal empire, it's an empire. You can't create an empire by diktat. Kingdoms, you can say there are already kingdoms and they will rule. But those are small, they are fragments, they are not the whole. So the whole can only be conceived in a modern way. There is no other way. But Gandhi's policy on the state is a very anarchist approach. You will say there is no need for this state, there are other ways to organize and so on. So he has those ideas. But my point is that he has those ideas, but on the other hand, he pragmatically concedes that it's not going to happen. And so he is promoting Nehru, he is playing politics and trying to put one above the other and enable what other people want. He is enabling what the Congress wants, the other.
See, reading this text, I cannot resist a very simple kind of intuition or feeling. Discursively, he's mainly resorting to his moral discourse.
Yeah.
Right? But at certain point, there is an implication for his understanding, analysis of the concrete reality. For instance, he seemed to suggest it's impossible for India to be fully armed, in military sense. So let's not even think about it. So in instance like this, you feel he has his own either intuitive or calculated analysis. We cannot compete
Yeah,
with
yeah.
in terms of the capital,
Mm.
right? Or the military power and so on.
Yeah.
So it's not only a moral issue, but also
Practical possibility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a sort of implied analysis.
Sure, that may be, yeah.
So,
So you have to develop some other sort of weapons, non-violent,
it is,
per-
I think
mental,
that's a calculated
spiritual.
development. You need to have the passive resistance
Mm.
because you cannot be an armed struggle.
Mhm.
In a way,
Mm.
it's not a choice, right? It's not like acting completely out of the moral universe. This is the best thing on earth, so let's have that. You don't seem to read that way.
No, but because he's rather than saying on his own steam that we can't arm ourselves, he is reacting to people who are arming themselves. There is already a movement which is going around killing British officers and indulging in violence and so on. So he is reacting to that, saying this won't work for us. We are, so that's where one has to take that into account. So, but the tremendous transformation that he wrought in the Indian entire situation as soon as he arrived, that is something which is still not entirely explained.
But politically, I'm sorry, I talk too much. Politically, it seems eventually when we look at historically, Gandhi's effectiveness was the launching of the mass movement, right?
Yeah.
To drive out the British ruling. Then that's it.
Absolutely.
In politically speaking, right? You can in that sense he is the national father. But he has here and there certain soft on what needs to be done with the language policy and so on, but in a non-systematic way.
Yeah.
Some gets picked up, some gets, but somehow I still feel the certain unspoken legacy you are still in dialogue with Gandhi thought. Cannot he is set in place. You cannot sort of ignore.
Yeah.
But I cannot quite put my finger on. I mean, sort of you operating within that boundary, right? Like for instance, how do you deal with the masses? I don't know. Yeah, but somehow you feel.
No, as I say, I think that the Gandhian, a kind of structural position of Gandhi continues to have some kind of a relevance and necessity, within the contemporary, and that's what is what I read in the way in which the new movement, Aam Aadmi movement, the anti-corruption movement, is working. Although it's a very middle class movement, they again try to bring a Gandhi-like person to lead. So there is a peculiar quality of the relation between a figure like that and the people whom they work with. Gandhi and the Congress, other members of the Congress, right? Who is the leader? This is an interesting question, right? What kind of leadership is Gandhi providing, and what is this peculiar thing where these people actually get the power, but he is the leader, right? The project is theirs, the plan, the strategy, the goals are all decided by this set, but they can't assume this particular position, and they have to bring somebody into it. So in that sense, it's the structurally Gandhi has not gone away. It's there, still there as a presence, ghostly kind of spiritual.
Can I ask you one last hypothetical question?
Okay.
This man passed away in 1948, right?
Yeah.
If he didn't die, what kind of scenario he would have a big role to play? What would you?
I don't think that on the economic front or the military front, etc., he would have a big role to play. But in those, when it comes to those issues which are of a political nature, but are to do with the question of, like the language question, I believe if he had been alive, there would have been a very different scenario, because it wouldn't have been easy, because in those days there was a lot of enthusiasm for reorganizing everything according to language based things. He was one of the people who fully understood and knew that that is a right thing to do, even though he had some other things also, other positions which contradicted that, but essentially he was there. Unlike people like Nehru, who were susceptible to the kind of industrial business class and other interests, he would have possibly held firm on that question. That's one thing. But economically, I don't think he would have made any difference. He would not have been able to, because the Bombay plan and the industrialists are already from the 30s, they are planning the future, you know. So they are not, it's already clear in the, you know, in the 30s that what kind of India is going to happen. In the sense, it may not be, you know, that means that there are people thinking about it.
So in a way, he's lucky.
Yeah, he
Died
didn't,
early, right? Like,
he didn't actually,
I have no.
He-
otherwise, his symbolic status.
his own, yeah, his own marginalization was, you know, could have been very well been the case.
I have one more question. Okay, in terms of language, grammar, and vocabulary, okay, Gandhians thought it's good to think, but in the present situation, you have a lot of a new vocabulary, but is it still dictate the kind of a Gandhian grammar? Is the
There is no Gandhian grammar. No, that's why I am saying, when it came to language, Gandhi had a very proper, pragmatic, practical policy. He did not, he said, he has written about language at length, and he is very sensible. He says, when there is an English word which everybody is using, just use it. Don't try to find some Indian word. You see, and he sets up a university, and there they actually undertake, you know, translation of simple
But
words.
And in the vocabulary level,
Yeah.
you can adopt the English.
But
word,
Gandhi does
but
not-
The civilization of India is the
No,
best.
but that is the
That's grammar.
that's the peculiarity of it. He talks about civilization of India, but he essentially means a bhakti civilization, you know, the mass the civilization. And his language is not at all a complicated language. He writes a simple, modern prose. He doesn't have literary, rhetorical, oratorical, you know, sort of devices at all at his command. He is actually free of all that. Only the thought, you know, only the ancient India, the religious thing comes in, but it is said in a language which is not. See, that's the thing. That is the where again you see that he speaks in a way which is direct, you know, no nonsense, just like that, you know, whatever he wants to say. The nonsense is in the content, not in the language. If there is like, no conceits, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, it's a hard nut to crack if there ever was one.